that you are reminded that you belong in every single room that you walk into. You deserve every single accomplishment that you earn because it's just that you earned it. And there's no possibility of entering a room if that room was not made for you to be in it at that moment. Hello, welcome back to another episode of Make Up Your Mind. I'm your host, Jahleane, and I hope you're having a fantastic Wednesday. And today, we're going to talk about a topic that I know affects us all, and it's something that's very serious. But before we get into it, I want to know if you relate to something. Have you ever had an experience where something really, really good happens to you? Maybe something that you've been wanting for a really long time. And then the accomplishment suddenly feels way bigger than who you are and bigger than the present moment. And also at the same time, you're overwhelmed by feelings of inadequacy and feeling like you're out of place. And then there's that one question that circulates your mind over and over and over. Am I good enough? And I'm here to tell you that voice is your inner critic, and what you're experiencing is imposter syndrome. Like I mentioned, this is something that no one is necessarily new to. This is a term that's been floating around the internet for quite some time now, but I think that it's as relevant as possible, especially as the year is winding down and we are moving towards our dreams, that you are reminded that you belong in every single room that you walk into. You deserve every single accomplishment that you earn because it's just that you earned it. And there's no possibility of entering a room if that room was not made for you to be in it at that moment. Imposter syndrome consistently hits after you do something really amazing, or you enter in a room that you feel like might be bigger than the present moment. And maybe even something that you've been working towards for months and months and months. It can be confused for the internal fear of success, but that's a conversation for another day. We did talk about it in a different podcast, but I do think a lot of these topics intertwine with each other. So today we're diving deep. We're figuring out what imposter syndrome is, the different types of imposter syndrome, how it shows up in your life, and most importantly, how to overcome it. Whether you are dealing with imposter syndrome at work, in a new situation that you're in a creative project that you're doing, whatever it is, maybe you're navigating a new industry, I'll be sharing tangible tips that a lot of people just don't take into consideration. And to do that, we'll dive in deep into the root causes, the 5 different types of imposter syndrome, and overall just some tips to build up your confidence so you can walk away feeling just that confident. So first, what is it? Imposter syndrome is an incessant fear where you feel like you're going to be exposed as a fraud or an imposter, even though you are more than likely extremely overqualified. But the funny thing about imposter syndrome is that it is always the most overly qualified people that experience it. It's never people who actually are frauds that feel a sense of imposter syndrome. I remember reading quotes from Lady Gaga and Oprah and all these amazing people who you would think would just feel like they're on top of the world, and they talk about experiencing imposter syndrome as well. A little bit how this has shown up in my life. I remember when I was working my first corporate sales job, working as a sales development representative, I was doing really well. And I basically was speaking with my managers about getting promoted into a full cycle account executive role, which basically means I would be managing the deal throughout the whole time and then closing the deal. So I'd be speaking to a lot more stakeholders and just having a lot more strategy involved. And in my role, I was just sourcing the opportunities, but then I would pass it on to the account executives initially. And I remember thinking about having that overwhelming responsibility, and it subconsciously terrified me. I honestly didn't think that I would be good enough in the role. I thought my success in that previous role was a fluke, that I was just able to keep up for 12 months, even though realistically that doesn't make sense, right? But that's how your subconscious works in these situations. It will make you cast aside all the reasons why you aren't an imposter so that what your bias is true. What your bias is shown to you. So in my case, my bias was I wouldn't be good at this job. My success was a fluke. So that's what I insisted upon seeing on every levels of my conscious and my subconscious. And over time, that was just hindering my success and hindering what I could do professionally and how I could grow, until I finally realized that this is just a way for me to almost keep myself small and not go after the bigger opportunity. That would be a bigger paycheck. It would be a great learning experience. And if I didn't like it, the reality is I can just do something else. These choices are more times than not never permanent. You can just do something else or pivot. So I bit the bullet, and guess what? I did great. Of course, there was a learning curve, but over time, I was able to do exactly what I need to do, because at the end of the day, if you're just thinking about your skills and your accomplishments and you've gotten this far, your skills and your accomplishments and the essence of who you are will repeat the same results over and over and over again. So we'll repeat that kind of success because it's almost ingrained in you. If you've been able to reach a level of success at past experiences, you'll be able to reach that level of success in future experiences as well. Sometimes it really is about looking at the facts rather than staying so committed to our emotions and internal biases and harsh criticisms that we have about ourselves. I can tell you right now, a lot of my peers did not seem to face the imposter syndrome that I felt like I did. More often than not, they were men who were extremely confident, and seeing them around me be able to take up space, talk about their achievements publicly, and so on, almost gave me the confidence too, because at the same time, why shouldn't you? Why shouldn't you speak loudly about yourself? Why shouldn't you think you should go after the opportunity? If they can do it, so can you. It's almost like that TikTok sound. If you've heard it, it says something like, if boys can do it, how hard can it be? Right? We can all accomplish the same things. The challenge that a lot of people face is that they let their imposter syndrome go unchecked. So they let it control their lives, and they let themselves believe these negative falsehoods, these most untrue of stories about themselves. And what ends up happening is they suffer from burnout. They start to dismiss themselves from opportunity. They never get to where they want to go. And it's important to address that. In a previous episode of Make Up Your Mind, I talk a little bit about how to close the gap between where you are and where you want to go. And it's definitely a must listen to if you are someone who feels like they're struggling with that gap in addition to imposter syndrome. But to address it, first, it's important to know exactly what kind of imposter syndrome you have. Sometimes there's a blanket statement over what imposter syndrome is, but there's actually 5 different types. So it can be a little bit tricky to figure out, which is why so many people might not resonate with it in the first place. The very first type of imposter syndrome is called the superhero. This is you if you feel like you are constantly working yourself past your limits. You are go, 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 go. You work yourself past your limits. You're constantly comparing yourself to family, friends, and acquaintances around you as what a benchmark of success should be. You might seek validation a lot from people all around you, from some of those same people that I just mentioned. And then also, because you're pushing yourself so hard, it leads to a lot of mental and emotional distress, just a decline in your well-being. You're basically someone who feels like they have to work harder than anybody else. Second is the perfectionist, which we hear a lot. This is you if you set unbelievably high standards of success for yourself. You have to reach for the moon and go to the stars, and if you don't get to the moon, you're going to be really pissed. But through having these unrealistic high expectations for yourself, it is impossible to reach them. You are probably someone who is likely to point out flaws that you have in your work, or criticize maybe any areas of improvement that you might have too. Perfectionists are rarely satisfied, and it leads to a lot of ignoring of the strengths, and because of that, a lot of anxiety, and of course, another decline in mental well-being. And in addition to this, because the goals that you set for yourself are so high, any mistake you make, you'll feel like you're incompetent, which we of course know is not true. The third is the natural genius. These are the people who feel like they should be able to succeed without effort. They measure their success based off how quickly they're able to grasp a new concept, and if they aren't able to get it like that, it's just not good enough. Maybe this might resonate with you if you were someone who learned concepts really, really quickly in like elementary school or 5th grade or something like that. But then over time, as concepts became more difficult, you noticed you had to study more, put in more effort, but you took it as a negative representation of yourself because you weren't able to grasp the concepts as quickly as when you were younger. You might be someone who thinks, if I don't get something right on the first try, I'm just not cut out for this. And next is the soloist. And this is the kind of person who feels like if they ask for help, that's a sign of a weakness. They feel like they need to bear the brunt of the weight and of the circumstances that they're going through all on their own. Now, if you are a girl boss, or if you just identify someone who is hyper independent, this might especially resonate with you. For the soloist, their self-worth stems from their productivity. So asking for help results in feelings of unworthiness and shame, unfortunately. And last but not least is the expert. The expert is, it's almost implied, right? They feel like they do not know enough and they'll never know enough. So they try to learn everything at all costs, their mental, their physical, their emotional well-being. They sacrifice everything just to learn and know everything so that they won't feel like a fraud. But conversely, they do feel like a fraud because they feel like they'll never know enough. It doesn't matter how much knowledge or experience they have, they always feel like it's never enough. And they feel that fear of being exposed and someone identifying that little gap that they don't have in their knowledge. And this specifically pertains to partners or colleagues. So think of it as if someone is applying for a job, but they don't apply unless they check off every single requirement there, even though we all know that no one actually hits all the requirements in a job unless you're overqualified for it. Of those 5, if you're on YouTube, drop it in the comment section which one you think that you'll resonate with the most. And here's the thing. The first step to getting over your imposter syndrome is to just address it. So which of those 5 do you resonate with? I personally feel like I'm a mix between a perfectionist and a superhero, someone who works hard and wants everything to be perfect. But I've been actively unlearning that over the years, especially as I grow the postgrad playbook and all of my other ventures. And I'm able to slowly undo those neural pathways of these tendencies by just acknowledging when it happens in every step of the way of your life. So for example, in my life, when I'm editing this podcast, or maybe I'm creating short form clips, the clips might not be 100% perfect, right? But I'm going to do my best to get what I can out there. And the reason why is because I know that sloppy action is the best way to move forward. Being a perfectionist, you want things to be 100% well done, gold star, A+ all the time. But that is the biggest hindrance to your inner artist. It's the biggest hindrance to your progress. When I went through the artist way, Julia Cameron said something really interesting, that being critical of your past work is essentially artist abuse. And in the same vein, work is only done when people decide that it's over. But artists decide that their work is completed at different stages, but your work is never truly done. So as a perfectionist, I work to identify the areas that my work might not be done, but I'm choosing that it is good enough for the quality that I have. Additionally, as someone who identifies as a superhero, I'm addressing that by making sure I have a little bit more work-life balance, hanging out with my friends, eating right, going to the gym, walking outside, doing Pilates, things like that, living a well-balanced life. Some other practical strategies to reframe this is to really notice how you talk to yourself internally. Are you constantly beating yourself down? Are you constantly not believing that you can do it? Are you constantly feeling the need to have more? It's just more and more and more. What are the stories and the narratives that you tell yourself? And sometimes it might not be really easy to pinpoint what this exactly is, but if you start journaling and you take journaling up as a practice, you're going to start notice your subconscious becoming conscious and the thoughts that you have coming out into the page. And over time, you're going to see the actual things that you think about yourself interwoven in the words that you put on that page. So whether it's a limiting belief, or it's a negative sentiment, or the need to achieve more, or the need to learn more, whatever it is, you're eventually going to see those themes throughout each entry. And from seeing those themes, you can reframe the thoughts that you have and actively work to nip them in the bud when they might come up. Secondly, is to just write down your successes. If you identify with having imposter syndrome or not feeling like you deserve to be in the rooms that you're in, sometimes it's the best thing to have a sheet of paper next to your workspace where you write down everything that you've accomplished, everything that you've learned, maybe some of the nice compliments other people have told you. And this goes into a success bank. And looking at that next to your work, or when you're grinding, or when you feel inadequate, it's going to counteract those motions. And so again, you're going to counteract that self-sabotage. The next tip is to lean on a mentor. Mentors are amazing. And I have a mentor myself who is really able to help me see through my blind spots. As people who are creatives in your postgrad years, in your 20s, when you feel like you just want to achieve more, everything's more and more and more and more and more, and you don't have access to your blind spots, your mentor shines a light on those. And usually that blind spot is how great you actually are. And a mentor, a good one at least, will constantly remind you that self-doubt is common. It's common, but it is not the truth. The inner critic piping up is far from the truth. The truth is that you belong. The truth is that you are good enough. And the truth is that people who actually have imposter syndrome are rarely ever truly frauds. Another really good tactical tip is to think about some of the friends and people you have in your life who just seem so talented, or maybe they're accomplishing amazing things. Maybe they are getting really good grades, or maybe they just had some amazing milestone. You probably would look at them and say, of course they did that. Of course they did that. That's them. They are so amazing to me in my eyes. But why isn't the same to you? Why can we not extend the same grace to ourselves? So try to look at yourself through the eyes of another person and think about what they would say about you. Someone who's a loved one, obviously. I don't think that we should take opinions from everybody at all. Think about the board of directors that you have in your life. So your board of directors is basically a group of people in your life who you trust actively to help you progress in a specific area. So for example, I might have a professional mentor who would be my board of directors. And also like my sister, my family, they're in my board of directors because I actually care about what they have to say about me and their opinions about my character and so on. So if there are people who are outside of your pool who actually know you and want the best for you, their opinions don't necessarily matter. So think about your board of directors and see yourself through the eyes that they see you. And this will help counteract the imposter syndrome, which leads me into my last tactic. Just stop comparing yourself to others. Of course, this is very difficult. How am I just going to not compare myself to others, Jahleane? How am I going to do that? Because at the end of the day, like I mentioned, oftentimes there is just no benchmark to success rather than looking left and right around you. But like I've mentioned in past episodes, if you're running your own race, if you look left or you look right, you are more likely to slow down. You don't hit the finish line as fast. But if you stay in your own lane and you go top speed and focus on what you're doing, you're going to get to the finish line a lot faster. So don't concern yourself with what other people are doing and don't use their successes as a benchmark because everyone's on their own path. Comparing yourself to others and creating an imaginary goalpost is one of the fastest ways to burn yourself out and just feel like you are not good enough, which is not true. No one's going to look at the time zones between New York, LA, and London and think one is on the wrong time. They're all on their own time, just in different time zones. Just because London is about 5 hours ahead of New York does not mean that New York is running behind in any sense rather than the literal time, but everything is on its own time. If we're specifically thinking about overcoming imposter syndrome at work, or if you're paving your own creative path, or what that might look like professionally, as always, preparation is key. Just showing up prepared, doing your research, and trusting the skills that you have that got you into the rooms in the first place. Because like I mentioned, you deserve to be in every single room that you walked into, and you wouldn't have been offered the opportunity unless someone truly saw something in you. And it is your job to consistently remind yourself you were chosen for a reason. So go to your affirmations list, look yourself in the mirror every morning and say, I was chosen for a reason, and the reasons are X, Y, and Z, and remind yourself of those accomplishments. Just like when I mentioned my story about being promoted to a full cycle sales role, I had to muster up the courage and remind myself when I maybe had a difficult conversation with someone who was in the C-suite who I was trying to sell to, that I was chosen for a reason. I have a proven track record of success and I can show up in this way and I can succeed. And the only one who's telling me I can't succeed are the limiting beliefs of my subconscious mind, which are about to go anyway. And so the question that we've all been waiting for, does imposter syndrome ever go away? And the true answer is, it depends. But in my experience, the answer is no. It doesn't ever go away, but you do learn how to adapt and cope and sort of finesse it over times. Like I mentioned, people like Lady Gaga, Oprah, and more still face imposter syndrome, even though from my eyes, they are incredibly successful and they've built empires for themselves, but they still are walking their own personal journeys. The specific doubts that you have about your imposter syndrome might change. In the beginning, it might be, am I qualified for this? Where later on, it might be, do I deserve this big leadership promotion? So as your life changes, the doubts that you also have might change too. But a tip for ongoing management is always just being mindful of it and these thoughts that come up and the actions that hinder you from taking meaningful progress or holding yourself back, and doing continued reflection, that journaling, that mindfulness. Remember that the root cause of imposter syndrome is really that inner critic and the impossibly high benchmarks that we set for ourselves that we always fall short of. But to close out this episode, like I mentioned, you belong into every single room that you walk into, and be adamant about rejecting any notion that you don't. Confidence comes from doing, and confidence comes from transforming into that new identity. Confidence comes from willing it into your present moment. So that's how you get over imposter syndrome and you make it stick. So thank you so much for listening to this episode. If you're on YouTube, make sure you hit the subscribe button. And if you're on Apple Podcasts, leave a review because that's how the show grows. And either way, if you're listening on the podcast app, Apple or Spotify, follow so that way you can get notified on every new episode every single Wednesday. So thank you so much, and I will see you next week.